My name is Atiff. I was born in Swindon and I am 41 years old. So my dad came here in the late 70s, early 80s. He was brought up in Birmingham. He was moved to Birmingham when he was 5 years old. My granddad was one of the first generation Pakistanis who moved to England and moved to Birmingham working into the factories after there was a lot of displacement in the area of Pakistan where we brought up in, where he was brought up in. He was brought up around the Azad Kashmir region, and they were building a dam there, the Mangla Dam. And when they made that dam, he obviously moved over to Birmingham, and then he brought my father over here. So my father was schooled in Birmingham, and he moved to Swindon after his schooling for work, basically. So in the late 70s, early 80s, he moved to Swindon. He didn't know anyone here, so he met a few people at the local mosque who then took him in. And that's how he came to settle in Swindon. He eventually ended up buying a house here. And then my mum come here, and we were all born here, my brothers and sisters, and myself, including myself. It was there was hardly any facilities. I remember my dad used to tell me that when it was the time to fast, the month of Ramadan used to come. They never even used to know that the month of Ramadan was here because there was no calendar. The mosque facilities wasn't great at that stage. And slowly, those sort of systems and everybody started to realize when the month of Ramadan was starting, etc., etc. So those are sort of difficulties that people face. They couldn't do their prayers, or they couldn't offer their monthly fast because nobody knew when the month of fast used to start back then. But slowly, things started to change, and you see a lot more people coming into Swindon, a lot more community developing over the time, and that's what formed the community basically. And I think if you look at immigration as a whole, you would say I'm third generation because my grandfather, my father, and then my dad moved here. But in this town, I would say I'm in Swindon specifically second generation, because my father was the first generation that moved here, and that made me the second generation of Pakistani diaspora in the town. It was a very different experience, I would say, to someone who'd maybe be growing up in the area, say like Birmingham, Smallheath, or in Southall. Our schools were very predominantly English people, you could say, in the school. The amount of Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Indian people were a handful at that stage in the schools that I went to. And I went to the schools that were most of the Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi diasporas will go to in town, like the Drove Junior School and what is now called the Lawn Manor Churchfield School. That's where I studied. And I think from that, living in Swindon, going out of town to places like Birmingham and Smallheath or Broadway, it would be almost like a culture shock, because here there was one mosque, one meat shop, no halal food places to eat. You would go to Smallheath and you'll go to Southall Broadway, and it would be so much choice, so much food, so much hustle and bustle. And here, if you converse in your own language, in Urdu, nobody understood you. And when you used to go there and you start conversing, you'd have to be careful, because there was probably hundreds of people, or if not scores of people, who would understand exactly what you're saying. So from that perspective, it was a bit of a culture shock when you would go into predominantly Asian areas, despite you being of someone from an English or from a Pakistani background. How I integrated into the English community, I think, is mainly through school and also through common shared interests. Like when I was growing up, I used to love football. I'm a big Man United supporter, so we used to go on and on about watching Man United play and watching the games, and also playing football outside, etc., etc., and playing cricket. And I think that's what brought us together as a community and helped us mix with some of the helped us integrate into community by having a common interest, which was predominantly around sport. I would say. In terms of racism, it was a bit difficult to start with when you were growing up going into school, etc. You were always conscious about someone making comments on your color, on your skin and stuff. And there were occasions where some people would call you certain unwanted terms like racial slurs at you. But I think, generally speaking, I think living in Swindon, it wasn't as bad as what maybe some people may have faced in other towns and experience. I think may have experienced further racism. I think it was easier in Swindon because I think maybe because there was so many of us. That's why it was a lot easier, or a lot less of an impact on us because there was less of us basically. And I think generally speaking, we would all get along quite well within our year groups in our schools, etc. And we all mix in and try to have fun and trying to enjoy each other's companies. For example, like playing football and then playing cricket after school and at lunch times, etc. I think that helped us mix in with the other people. And I think the schools that we went to, they were largely English schools where a lot of people from an English background used to go and study there. And even in the junior school and even in the secondary school, it was that sort of experience. So I don't think this is why I don't think we fear that much racism. Not so much when we were little, but as we got older, obviously, because coming from a Muslim background, we were told to be careful around not hanging around people or not going to pubs and not getting yourself into trouble with drugs and drinking and things like that. And they would warn us against doing that sort of stuff and staying away from people who were involved in drugs and drinking, etc. So that's something that used to always tell us to be careful of. Do not drink alcohol, and even around like having girlfriends and stuff. Because obviously it wasn't seen as a norm to have a girlfriend or going out with girls, etc. Within our culture, within our diaspora community, all the things have changed now. I mean, there was a lot of, when I was growing up, like everyone would be having an arranged marriage. Now it's a lot different. It's a lot of different experience in terms of how you would meet someone. There's a lot of involvement from the person themselves. Like if I wanted to get married now, I would probably have to go out, find someone for myself, and then tell my parents that I've met this person and I'd like you to come and see them, and then with their blessing you'd get married if they're happy, etc. But then at that time there was a lot more arranged marriages taking place, and not so much anymore though. I wouldn't say I had an arranged marriage. I would say that basically I was introduced to someone, and then after the introduction I got to know someone and I told my mother about the person that I was going to know, and then we met up as families and we sat down and we had a discussion and made sure we were all on the same page and we all understood each other, made sure that it was the right thing to do, and that's how my marriage happened. Balancing the cultures wasn't so easy. It was quite difficult because, especially having parents coming from Pakistani diaspora who were born in Pakistan, they were very traditional in their roots, and some of the things that you would want to do, you wanted to do, etc., were very alien to their thinking, or what they want you to do, basically. So it's quite difficult to balance it out, and you had to make sacrifices sometimes. Like we weren't allowed to go out after say 9-10 o'clock at night. We had to be at home and sit with the family and watch TV, watch EastEnders, watch programs, watch football on TV, etc. Whereas other people may have been out with their friends, going out on a night out, etc. We weren't allowed to do that because it wasn't seen as the norm in our society to be going out very late. And if we are to go out late, it would be together as a family. You wouldn't be going out on a jolly on your own with your friends till 2 o'clock in the morning in the town, etc. Although you may have wanted to do that, but it was something that you knew that was not normal for you, and you knew, as a youngster, especially growing up, you knew it'd be in a lot of trouble if you did go out. I think around when you were choosing your subjects and stuff for GCSEs and stuff, I think there was a traditional focus on you must study maths and science, etc., and trying to make sure that you do the right sort of options when you're choosing your GCSEs. I think I was really into drama at that stage when I was growing up, and it was coming to my time to choose my GCSEs. My parents was like, "What are you going to do with a drama GCSE? It's not going to help you in any way. You must study maths and English and science, etc. And they had that traditional thought that these are the traditional subjects that you must work hard in. But then I chose something else instead of drama. But I do feel that I should have chosen drama, and maybe I would have got a lot better grades in my GCSEs. Balancing culture with your heritage, etc. I think one of the thing is language. I think across the, say, the third, fourth generation diaspora, it's very difficult to get that language. Like, I'm multilingual. I could speak Urdu, I could speak English. If you speak in Punjabi, you'll understand Punjabi, etc. Whereas if I'm looking at my children, looking at my daughter, she understands some of the languages that we speak in. She understands if you say to her, get up in your Urdu or whatever. But she'll never ever speak it because, as parents, my wife is also someone who's been brought up here. You don't speak it at home for some reason. We don't speak it amongst ourselves, the language. So I think some of the challenges that faced for the third, fourth, fifth generations is around losing the touch with the language, because it's not spoken at home as commonly as it was when we were growing up. Like, my dad would tell us off if we spoke in English. He wanted us to speak in our Urdu language, but it was very difficult for me. He couldn't stop us from doing that because we would sit there and we watch TV and our conversations would eventually be all in English and that. So it was very difficult for him to fight that battle. Religion is a very interesting topic, actually, because my lived experience of learning about religion, learning about Islam, was going to the mosques on Monday to Friday, and it was a very subcontinental kind of like learning techniques that were used at that time. You would just go there for 2 hours. You would probably read a little bit of the Quran to the Imam, which would be probably 5-10 minutes of that, and the rest, an hour and 50 minutes or an hour and 20 minutes, would be spent just tossing around in the class, messing around, and having that banter with the teacher, with your friends, basically. And everyone that I knew that grew up around the Broad Street, Manchester Road area in Swindon will go to the same mosque. We'll all go to that one mosque, and for us it would be like a social, almost, going to the mosque. We used to hate the experience of going to the mosque, but in some ways we used to love it because it was a time to come and spend with your friends and chat with them again after school, you know. Whereas now the experience with my daughter, trying to teach her about Islam, it's a lot different. There's a lot more modern educational techniques being used in terms of bringing them up and teaching about religion, etc., etc., especially teaching about food and what's haram, what's not haram, etc., in terms of what she could eat and stuff. She understands that, but then growing up and learning the Quran, etc., I think you've got teachers who are now British born, who are now introducing modern education techniques to teach children in a lot more fun and a lot more modern way, you could say. As a parent, I believe that it's still very important to teach your children about the religion and about the religion that you follow. I feel that this country allows for religious freedom and for you to express yourself as you may wish to. So I think it's very important that you continue to teach your children about religion. I don't think it makes me less British if I'm a British Muslim, or if I'm not British Muslim, you know. So I believe that it's very important, because I think our parents, when they came into this town, they carved themselves out an identity. They worked with the authorities, or the community worked together to build mosques, temples, etc. They have to fight for their rights and to get those buildings, to get those mosques, etc. built. And I feel that that generation needs to learn about those sacrifices our elders made to have those mosques and centers established, and we need to teach them about religion, which is based in a very British culture. Growing up around Broad Street, Manchester, I was born in Manchester Road, in the house of Manchester Road. And growing up around Manchester Road, it was very, that was the community, basically. The Pakistani, the Bangladeshi, the Indian community, you could say, was all around, growing up around that Broad Street, Manchester Road area. And that's where the mosque was, and that's where the only meat shop was that you would go to on occasions to get meat from, halal meat from, basically. But growing up in that area, it was very like it wasn't so much choice there. It was almost like a monopoly. One shop was the meat shop, and you would go there. Um, Whereas if you went to Small Heath or somewhere in Birmingham or somewhere down south of Broadway or Upton Park in Green Street, there'd be so many other choices. So you'd only go to that shop in an emergency. If you had to get meat locally, and some visitors turn up unexpectedly, and you had to get meat, you would go to that one shop basically, because you had to out of necessity. But now it's more like there's so many different choices. There's so many different meat shops. We even got two Indian sweet shops in the town, and also halal food. Going out for dinner was a luxury. You'd have to go out of town. I think predominantly speaking, to still today, you would go out of town to enjoy a good meal, have a nice sort of ambience, place to eat. But there's a lot more halal food choices around Manchester Road, around Broad Street. There's places where you could sit down and have a cup of tea and have some halal food. So the community has diversified it in that sense around that Manchester Road, Broad Street area. My feeling around Manchester Road, Broad Street area is that the area's become a lot more, like you said, diversified. There's a lot more high occupancy in that area. People live there for a short period and then move out. So it's almost like a temporary area where people are looking to establish themselves in the town, and once they have, they move out. When I speak to Pakistanis now of people who have moved in, say, in the last 15 to 20 years, most of the people are of different caliber. Whereas my parents, my granddad, etc., they were factory workers, they were working class. Now you have Pakistanis who have come here, studied, who are software engineers. The community is a lot more educated. So not many people really prefer to live in that area from the Pakistani diaspora. Although the amenities are there, they prefer to live on the further outskirts of town. And you see a lot of a new generation of Pakistanis that are moving into Swindon. They are choosing to live mainly in the newer areas like North Swindon, Tadpole, etc. And that just shows how diversified the community has become, from being predominantly a large population being working class, factory workers, bus drivers, etc., taxi drivers, moving towards a much more diversification in the roles in education, in terms of software engineering, doctors, nurses, care workers, etc. They prefer to live outside of that area. South Asians that live in Swindon compared to people who live in South Asians that live in Birmingham or any other areas, I feel that I think because it's town, although had a sizable population of Pakistanis, Indians, etc., it wasn't a town which was as big as, say, Birmingham was, or Bradford was, or Manchester, etc. And because of that, I think everyone has had the same experiences I've had probably. Like I mentioned, when we used to go out of town, when we used to go to visit those areas, it was almost like a culture shock to yourself as well, because you would go somewhere and people would be walking around in Salwar Kameez. I mean, if you go back, say, 20 years in this town, say, in the late 90s, early 80s, etc., you would go to the town and somebody walking about in Salwar Kameez, in a traditional Asian dress, that person would stand out quite a bit, because it wasn't seen as a norm. Now, if you go now, you see a lot more people. I've noticed myself, if I go through town, there's a lot more people in Asian dress, etc. But going to places like Birmingham, it was almost like the norm to wear Salwar Kameez and seeing people in Salwar Kameez. So when you used to come from a town like Swindon, going to Bradford, Birmingham, London, etc., it was a bit of a culture shock, because there'd be a change in the way people dress and the way that people spoke, etc., and the way that people used to go about their daily lives is a lot different to what we do here. And I think there was probably a lot more sense of community. I think my friends would mention that people will just turn up to each other's houses. Say I lived in Birmingham and there's 10, 15 houses. I know they're all my family basically. people will just turn up unannounced and knock on the door, or just walk in and have a chat and stuff. And I don't think Swindon, although they had a sizable community, it didn't have that level of community spirit. If you wanted to go to someone's house, you'd either get in touch with them before, call them up and say, hey, we're looking to come over, and are you at home, etc. Whereas in places like London, Birmingham, it was a lot more, you could say, tight-knit communities, so tight that the doors would be open to family members to come and knock at any time and enjoy a cup of tea and a chat. You could say some, especially growing up in Swindon, when you used to say you had parents' evening and stuff. I mean, my dad was brought up here. He was brought up here since he was 5 years old, so his English was very good. But I think it was when, if you had to take your mum and say your dad wasn't around, or your dad was busy or something and he couldn't make it, and you had to take your mum to the parents' evening, you'd go there and you had to be listening to what the teacher was saying, but at the same time also acting as an interpreter for the teacher. So if the teacher was saying that, oh, you've not done very well, he doesn't concentrate in class, you'd have to bite the bullet and try to translate that to your parents and tell them that, oh, the teacher's saying I don't concentrate in class, etc. So it was quite a difficult one. But then slowly, I think, like my mother herself, because she had grandchildren, they speak English, and I think she's had to force herself to speak English. And I think she just felt, I think it's also a confidence thing as well amongst our parents, where they don't feel confident enough to speak because they have a different sort of accent, or they may say something different. But they can speak quite well, some of them, and you'll be surprised how much the English has come since they've first come into this town. In terms of what you share with the future generations, or what you learn about life, basically is just to do your best and try to mix in with as many people as you can. No, don't ever forget your roots and your identity. It's what makes you, and be proud of your roots and your identity, because it's what's your fabric. It's what's made you who you are today. And don't ever forget your roots. Basically, it's what's so beautiful about living in Britain. There's so many different people, different faces, different communities. Especially in this town in Swindon, there's a large swathe of different people living here. They're all coming here for different purposes, working here, and just try your best to mix in and celebrate your life and celebrate your culture as much as you can.